She shoved my pregnant wife down the stairs, right there on the oak steps my father built by hand before he passed away. And when the sheriff's helicopter landed in her yard a week later, the entire neighborhood finally saw who Cynthia Bellamy really was, the queen of our HOA, the woman who thought she could control everything and everyone, until she went too far. My name's Daniel Mercer. I'm a structural engineer, which means I've spent 20 years studying how pressure makes things collapse, bridges, buildings, foundations. But I never expected to learn that the same rule applies to people, especially people like Cynthia. When my wife and I moved into Maplewood Crossing, it looked like the kind of neighborhood you see in real estate brochures, fresh paint-trimmed lawns, and that little brass plaque at the entrance that says, "Pride in Community." What they don't tell you is that pride usually means fear. Fear of breaking a rule, of crossing someone in power. Cynthia Bellamy was that power. Mid-50s pearl necklace clipboard always tucked under one arm like a badge. She ran the HOA like it was her personal kingdom. The first week we moved in, she knocked on my door, smiled like a realtor and said, "Welcome to Maplewood Crossing. I hope you like structure." The way she said that word structure made my skin crawl. At first it was just little things, notes about the trash cans, a reminder that our lawn was slightly uneven, a warning that the shutters weren't an approved shade of gray. My wife laughed it off. "Every neighborhood has a Karen," she said. But something about Cynthia's smile told me this wasn't normal nosiness, it was obsession. Still, I tried to play nice. I fixed what she complained about. I followed every regulation. I told myself maybe if I just stayed quiet she'd get bored and move on. Then came the day she blocked my wife on the front steps. It was late afternoon. My wife had just gotten home from the store, 2 grocery bags in her arms, one hand on the railing to steady herself. She was 7 months pregnant, our first baby, after years of trying. Cynthia was waiting at the top of the stairs, her hands on her hips, that tight smile plastered across her face. "I need to remind you," she said, "that your front landscaping isn't in compliance." My wife tried to step around her, calm and polite. "I'll take care of it, Cynthia, but can I please?" Cynthia didn't move. "If you can't follow the standards," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "maybe you shouldn't be living here." I heard the bags hit the concrete before I even saw what happened. A shove, not hard enough to look intentional, but enough to make my wife stumble. The sound of glass jars shattering. Her gasp. Her foot slipping off the first tread. I was out the door before she hit the ground. I caught her by the arm, held her close while she trembled, trying to breathe. Cynthia stood above us, arms folded. No apology, no concern, just that same thin smile. "You'll hear from the board," she said, and walked away. I remember pressing my hand to the oak railing, feeling the grooves my father carved into it years ago. That stairway was his legacy, our family's heart. And that moment, watching my wife clutch her belly in pain, I swore I would never let Cynthia or anyone tear that apart. The next morning, the entire neighborhood knew about the incident, but not the truth. Cynthia had already spun the story. She sent out notices claiming we were non-compliant homeowners under review. The words were everywhere on the bulletin board and emails even taped to mailboxes. Not a word about what she'd done, just accusations. But I noticed something else that morning. Neighbors whispering near the park, looking at me, then at their own homes. I saw the exhaustion in their faces, the quiet resentment. Cynthia had been terrorizing them for years. My wife's fall just made them realize they weren't alone. At the next HOA meeting, I decided to face her. The clubhouse smelled like bleach and old carpet, the kind of place that pretends to be official but feels like a trap. Cynthia sat at the head of the table, pearls glinting under the fluorescent light. Next to her was Richard Hale, the treasurer, mid-40s, nervous, sweating through his collar. He avoided my eyes the whole time. Cynthia droned on about community image and necessary fines. Richard shuffled papers, hands trembling. I watched his every move. There was something in his silence, fear, maybe guilt. I knew then that he wasn't loyal to her. He was trapped by her. After the meeting, I lingered by the door. Richard passed me, dropped his pen, bent down, and whispered, "Check the filings." Then he walked away. Check the filings. That's all I needed. Back in my office, I pulled every document the HOA had ever issued, bylaws, amendments, resolutions. Hours turned into days, pages covered my desk. And that's when I found it, the foundation crack. The lien notice Cynthia sent me cited Resolution 14B, a rule supposedly giving her power to seize property for unpaid fines. But Resolution 14B didn't exist. It had never been filed with the county. Legally, it meant nothing. She was bluffing, all of it her threats, her fines, her power built on a fake rule. But I'll admit there was a moment I almost gave up. I remember sitting there staring at that fake resolution thinking, what's the point? People like her always win. They lie louder, they scare people into silence, and the world just lets it happen. And then I looked at the framed photo on my desk, my wife's smiling hand on her belly, and I thought of my father's words. Build it right, Danny, and it'll stand through any storm. That was my turning point. If she wanted a war of structure, she was getting one. The next weekend was the community's monthly inspection walk, Cynthia's favorite power trip. She strutted through the neighborhood with her clipboard, 2 board members trailing like disciples. Neighbors stood on porches pretending to tidy their lawns, afraid to make eye contact. I waited near the main gate, the one with the brass letters spelling Maplewood Crossing. When she reached me, I held up the letter she'd sent. Cynthia, I said loud enough for the nearby families to hear this. Lien notice you mailed me cites, Resolution 14B. It doesn't exist in county records. You fabricated it. Her smile froze for half a second. Then came the deflection. The board's authority doesn't require county approval, she snapped. I took a step closer. Authority isn't real if it's built on lies. You forged this document and you know it. The murmurs started quiet at first, then spreading. Phones came out. Neighbors began searching the county database right there on the sidewalk. I saw one mom whisper to another, "She's right. It's not listed." For the first time, Cynthia looked nervous. Her pearls didn't shine quite as bright in the sunlight. She snapped her clipboard shut and stormed off. But she'd already lost control of the narrative. A few nights later, I went to a small meeting at the church on the edge of town. I wasn't there to speak. I just wanted to listen. The air smelled like cedar and candle wax. Families filled the pews, voices low, restless. And then Richard stood up. His hands shook so badly he had to grip the pew in front of him. "She's been lying to all of you," he said, voice cracking. "Not just about the lien, about everything. The money, the fines, the contracts. I signed off on things that never happened because she threatened me, my wife's job, my son's scholarship, my mortgage. But after what she did to Daniel's wife, I can't keep quiet anymore." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, anger. People turned on each other, recounting their own stories, fake violations, phantom fees, threats. And in that chaos, something changed. Fear turned into fury. Cynthia's empire began to crumble from the inside. By morning, my living room became the headquarters for what came next. Blueprints, letters, photos, copies of fines. Neighbors brought everything. My coffee table looked like a war map. Richard came too, holding a small black binder. When he handed it to me, his voice trembled. "This is everything," he said, "every payment she ever falsified." That binder was the death sentence. We didn't wait long. The next HOA board meeting was Thursday night. Cynthia had chosen the recreation hall again, her favorite stage. Rows of metal chairs, that same elevated platform she loved to sit on while lecturing everyone. But this time the hall was packed. Standing room only. People clutching documents, whispering, waiting. At exactly 7, Cynthia swept in, pearls, glinting heels echoing like gunshots. "We'll begin with the Mercer family's outstanding violations," she said. I stood up before she could continue. "Before you fine anyone else, we need to discuss these." I set Richard's binder on the table and flipped it open. Payments to non-existent contractors, duplicate fines, legal fees for cases that don't exist. Gasps filled the room. Cynthia's voice rose sharp and desperate. "These are lies. Board business confidential." Then Richard stood shaking but firm. "They're not lies. They're mine. I signed those checks because you threatened my family. But not anymore." The room exploded. Neighbors shouting, holding up their own papers, proof of everything she'd done. "You fined my kid's wheelchair ramp," someone yelled. "You charged me twice for fence paint," another shouted. Cynthia slammed her clipboard screaming for order, but her voice was drowned by the crowd. The chant started somewhere in the back. One voice at first, then dozens. Then the whole room. Step down, step down. She stood frozen, face red pearls trembling. For the first time she looked small. The woman who ruled by fear, now cornered by her own community. Richard raised his voice above the noise. "I move to call a special election to remove Cynthia Bellamy as president of the HOA. Seconded," someone yelled. The room roared in approval. Cynthia's clipboard hit the floor with a clatter. She tried to speak, but the words drowned in the storm of voices demanding her resignation. And then she ran. The next afternoon, the sheriff's helicopter appeared over Maplewood Crossing blades, chopping through the air. It circled once, then descended on the open field behind Cynthia's house. Deputies moved in, calm and efficient. Within minutes, she emerged, still shouting about conspiracies, pearls swinging wildly. But this time, nobody listened. As they led her away, neighbors lined the street. No cheering, no jeering, just silence. The kind of silence that means closure. I stood at the edge of the field, hand resting on the carpenter's pencil. I always kept in my pocket, the same one my father used when he built our stairway. That stairway had carried us through hell. It had seen my wife fall, and it had seen us rise again. Cynthia tried to use control as her foundation, but power built on fear always cracks, and when it does, it collapses fast. So if there's one thing I learned from all this, it's simple. No matter how strong someone pretends to be, the truth always knows where to hit the fault line.